Thank you very much. My name is Roy Morris. I am Press Secretary to the Prime Minister, and my duty this morning, or for the day really, is to be Master of Ceremonies. However, given the packed program, you're not going to see or hear a lot of me. This morning's session, or before we get started, if you check behind me on the screen, you will see the Wi-Fi login and password, which should make life a little easier for you. So, let me begin by welcoming you, our visitors, to Barbados and to the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Center, to the 9th Caribbean Forum on Regional Transformation for Inclusive and Sustainable Growth. These are terms that have become buzzwords within recent years, but this morning, during the course of today rather, we hope to make them, to give flesh to them by having some robust discussion. And I'm told that we do not want to dwell on formality or pomp, so we are going to go directly into our sessions. And the opening session, or welcome, we are going to invite the Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, Mr. Tua Hang, Zhang, to address you.
Thank you, all of you. The most honorable Prime Minister Mia Mottley, Prime Ministers, Ministers and Central Bank Governors, and Mr. Warren Smith, President of the Caribbean Development Bank, and representatives of other international organizations, friends and colleagues, good morning. And of course, on behalf of the IMF, I welcome all of you to the 2019 Caribbean Forum on Regional Transformation. I'm very glad to see old friends and also the new faces. I would like to thank, of course, the government of Barbados for its warm hospitalities, and particular Prime Minister Mia Mottley for her strong support for the forum. I would also like to thank the Caribbean Development Bank for their great effort in co-organizing this event with us. This is my first time to have a pleasure to visit these beautiful countries. Since my arrival yesterday, I was very much impressed by the spirit, the diversity, and the determinations of the Barbados people to pursue their dreams of a better life. So here, let me congratulate the Barbados on its excellent progress in implementing the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation programs, and or better known as the BIRD. Here I also want to express my deepest sympathies to the government and the people of the Bahamas for the loss of the life and the devastations caused by the hurricanes Dorian. The recent hurricanes has once again highlighted the special vulnerabilities of the Caribbeans and the continued need to strengthen resilience. So I'm glad that these forums will devote a special session to explore a better way to build resilience. The theme of this forum is regional transformation. I think this is important because regional transformation is essential to support higher economic growth for the Caribbean. As reflected in our agenda later today, to those of us working in these regions, there are three areas are critical. First one is regional integration. Second one is the working towards a disaster resilience strategy. And third one is improving tax policies. So before I give it to the panelists, let me offer a few thoughts on each of the three subjects. First one is on regional integration. I think quite a few years ago, I attended the same event in Jamaica. I recall the regional integrations already, it was a topic. So you can see that the regional integrations is the permanent sort of important issues here. And without any doubt, deeper economic integrations within the Caribbean has been a priority since the establishment of CARICOMs in 1973. So there are some progress, but the progress is not enough. And recent work by the fund staff have found that greater integration or greater international trade and mobility of people and capital could generate significant macroeconomic benefits. So today's discussions will look at a possible actions to boost further the regional integration process. Second, it's on climate change and disaster resilience strategy. As I mentioned a moment ago, climate change is expected to intensify the impact of the natural disasters and worsen the vulnerabilities of small states in the Caribbean. Rising sea levels increase the risk of erosions and flooding, and warmer water temperatures heighten the potentials for more intense hurricanes. Although warmer temperatures is good for swimmers, I know. But we must come together to address the challenges posed by climate change and help those most affected by it. And in recent studies, the fund staff proposed a three-pillar strategy, which is widely endorsed by the members here. The three pillars include three kinds of resistance. One is structural resilience, second one is financial resilience, and third one is post-disaster resilience. Let me touch upon each of them. First, the structural resilience. Structural resilience will require infrastructures and other investment to limit the impact of disasters. The post-resilience aims at facilitate a speedy recovery after the event and supported by contingencies planning such as emergency response planning and related events. And of course, financial resilience is touch upon the facilities, financial arrangement, so that the impact of the natural disasters can be more efficiently addressed. So all of these pillars are quite important, and we're glad to see that all these efforts requires international communities, the joint effort. Particularly, emergency relief and financing the restructuring effort following the catastrophic event like Hurricane Dorian's is a key responsibility of the global communities and regional communities. So I'm glad to see that soon after the hurricane hit, leaders of the CARICOM showed a strong solidarities with the Bahamas, and including by deploying the security forces. Of course, I have to say a little bit more on the financial resilience. This, of course, as I said, is financial resilience is built on the fiscal buffers and using a pre-arranged financial instrument to protect fiscal sustainabilities and manage recovery costs. And the fund side, the fund has recently, actually early this year, has decided to increase the access to both our rapid financing instrument, which is the access, leading to the access of GRA resources, and on the other hand, to our rapid credit facilities, which is our PRGT resources. So we increase the access, all of them, to the 50% of the quota per year and 100% of the quota on a cumulative basis. So several countries in these regions, including Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines, have made use of these facilities over the last decade. And I'm glad to see that Grenada and Dominica are piloting a disaster resilience strategy at this moment. So later, all of us together will look forward to hearing their experiences, including more about their challenges and constraints. So the last point I want to touch is on the tax policies. All Caribbean countries face the challenges how to maintain a tax system that is competitive while also raising adequate revenues. In the regional context, avoiding a race to the bottom could provide substantial collective benefit. So today's discussion, I believe, will provide an opportunity to hear views from policymakers, tax experts, and industry representatives. So let me conclude. We at the IMF very much value the importance which we have touched upon all these points the moment ago. And I'm very confident that all of us will benefit from the discussions and share the experiences among ourselves. And of course, here I would like to emphasize once again that the IMF remains fully committed in supporting and assisting the Caribbean countries in all its efforts. And of course, I look forward to fruitful discussions and engaging with all of you on the important topics before us. With that, I thank you very much and wish everybody all the best for the day. Thank you.
I'm sorry, particularly since the IMF's local representative has made it clear that if we fall out of line at any point during the agenda, I'm supposed to sing a calypso, and you don't want to hear me sing. So, at this time, I'll invite to the podium the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Mr. Warren Smith, to address you. The Caribbean Development Bank is the second major organizer of this event.
Chairman, the Honorable Mia Moore-Motley, Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, Minister of National Security and the Civil Service, Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Sustainable Development, National Security, People Empowerment and Constituency Development, the St. Kitts and Nevis, the Honorable Alan Chastaney, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs and the Public Service of St. Lucia, the Honorable Charlene Cartwright Robinson, Premier and Minister of Finance, Investment and Trade, Turks and Caicos Islands, the Honorable Peter Turnquist, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for the Bahamas, Mr. Tao Zhang, Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, His Excellency Erwin LaRocque, Secretary General of CARICOM, representatives of the donor community, ministers of government, members of the diplomatic corps, other invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. That's a tall order. Good morning.
Good morning.
I join my colleague from the International Monetary Fund in welcoming you to Barbados and to the 9th Annual Caribbean Forum. For us at the Caribbean Development Bank, it is an honor to be co-hosting this forum with the Government of Barbados and with the International Monetary Fund. If my memory serves me right, it is the first time this gathering is taking place here in Barbados. The theme of the forum, Regional Transformation for Inclusive and Sustainable Growth, captures the essence of one of our region's biggest challenges over the next decade or so. We are part of a global movement towards 2030 and the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Agenda. We have made a commitment that not a single member of the Caribbean family will be left behind when we complete that journey. I am mindful that we should not underestimate the obstacle course that lies ahead of us. Indeed, unsustainable fiscal deficits, huge debt overhangs, high unemployment, rising poverty levels, and a predisposition to extreme vulnerabilities are hurdles that we must overcome. Time is of the essence. Almost 5 years have passed since we adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, but progress has been slow. In the next 2 months, we enter the final decade of the SDGs. It becomes even more of an imperative then that we accelerate the pace towards that 2030 goalpost. I am optimistic that achievement of the SDGs remains very much within our reach, and I shared that conviction with my governors at the CDB annual meeting a few months ago in Trinidad and Tobago. Fora like this one present us with a unique opportunity to revisit our progress and to reformulate our strategies where necessary. I am therefore pleased that today we'll be taking a more in-depth look at some of the critical elements of the transformation that is required, whether it be speeding up the regional integration movement and better leveraging the arrangements of the integration project, or developing a coherent strategy for building structural, financial, and post-disaster resilience in a fiscally sustainable way, or maintaining a competitive tax system that also raises the revenue required to fund public expenditures. This morning, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to draw to your attention one issue in particular that is common to all of these critical elements of transformation. Poor rates of implementation and weak implementation capacity are ongoing concerns for Caribbean public sector managers. Moving the needle on the solutions to our region's perennial challenges requires a relentless commitment to implementation, starting with a cultural shift that encourages increased accountability. We often joke about Caribbean people always being late, but time is money. So that tardiness undermines our capacity to deliver goods and services in a timely manner and undercuts our ability to compete based on low cost and/or high quality. Lateness, however, is only one manifestation of our implementation problem. Public sector investment programs are underperforming, with several countries reporting implementation rates below 35% and as low as 20% in some cases. We attribute to the public sector responsibility for creating an appropriate environment for the private sector to take leadership for economic growth and development. A PSIP that is performing effectively will stimulate private investment. The reverse is also true. An underperforming PSIP will undermine private sector confidence and its willingness to invest. Completion delays lead to postponement in delivery of the intended development benefits, as well as cost overages, which can compound an already burdensome public debt. The World Bank's Doing Business indicators, and we love to return to this theme, colleagues, give us an idea of some of the critical factors that impact business decisions, including starting a business, dealing with construction permits, getting electricity services, and trading across borders. The speed with which these can take place provides a gauge of our region's efficiency vis-à-vis the best in class. We should not regard the analyses of this data simply as criticisms of our shortcomings in these areas. More importantly, we should grasp the opportunity for targeted redress of these very things that hamper competitiveness. Let us pull out for priority action those low-hanging fruits that can bring significant benefit with relatively minimal effort. I must admit that implementation is a grave concern for CDB itself. The growing buckets of undisbursed balances on our books keep me awake at night. It is cold comfort that other development partners are facing a similar challenge. Bear in mind that none of us are delivering on our development mandate if the funds intended for these countries remain in our coffers. Our goal should be for the intended beneficiaries to be able to access these resources for high priority development projects as quickly as possible. At the CDB, we're attacking the implementation challenge from several fronts. Internally, we are spearheading a major overhaul of our systems and our business processes. This transformation is underpinned by an aggressive information technology strategy to get closer to our clients, to improve our responsiveness, and to generate greater efficiencies. We have also adopted a new procurement framework which should increase operational flexibility and accelerate project implementation. At the country level, training is a major vehicle for addressing the implementation issue. We are now completing a region-wide program in public policy analysis and project cycle management training, which is targeted at enhancing skills in implementation and other areas of project management. Over 2,000 public officials have been trained over the past 3 years. We will launch e-modules to extend access to this training to an even larger number of our public servants. Training is also being provided through the CDB World Bank Financed Caribbean Procurement Training and Consultancy Center, the first permanent center for procurement excellence in the Caribbean. In addition to training, we're encouraging behavior change through, for example, institutionalized delivery mechanisms or through project-by-project capacity and institutional building support. We have also been working with other development partners to develop joint approaches to our common programs. On the margins of the recent World Bank IMF annual meetings, I signed a new procurement procedural framework with the European Investment Bank to harmonize our procedures for a range of climate-focused investments in the Caribbean. We are in discussion with other development partners to simply harmonize procurement and other procedures for enhanced implementation efficiency. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to reiterate my optimism for our region's future. Let us rally behind the clarion call of the sustainable agenda to leave no one behind, and use our collective power to push forward with determination so that all of the sustainable development goals can be achieved by 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Just two housekeeping matters. Immediately at the end of this opening session, the delegates who are seated at the head table will gather for a group photograph, or a family photograph as it is called in this forum. And at that point, the members of the media will depart. You are welcome back in the afternoon for session 4, which starts around 3:45, and then the closing ceremony. But in order to promote robust and free discussion, the delegates would like to be able to do so without the presence of the media. At this time, it is my pleasure to invite the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Amor-Motley, to address the conference.
Good morning to each and every one of you. Let me first welcome those of you who are visiting to Barbados, and for those who are here for the first time, in particular, let me say that this day of work is not counted as a visit, so you have to start fresh and come again. I hope that we recognize that our regional brothers and sisters who are gathered here are here because we believe fundamentally that it is only through collective action that we are going to make the difference to our people. This conference this morning is timely, and ironically, it is only this week that the Secretary General of the United Nations penned a piece for the Financial Times that looked at the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals to which the President of the Caribbean Development Bank just referred. And one of the things that struck me is that the world truly is cyclical, not just in economic performance, but in its adherence to the principles that ultimately guide our behavior. For in his piece, he reflected on the inability of governments to be able to find sufficient financing to meet the challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals, included in which, of course, is the existential threat of the climate crisis. We in the Caribbean are not surprised, because we have, in the post-independence movement, held firm to the belief that each citizen matters. And we have seen the rest of the world come and go with respect to what ought to matter in terms of the development trajectory of nations. Mercifully, we are back towards sustainable and inclusive growth. And growth that ultimately reflects on the ability for each of our citizens to become the best that they can be. But that is not going to happen by magic, nor by serendipity. And we have recognized that we are required to play the hand that we have, even if, in the words of the great Robert Nesta Marley, we draw a bad card. That doesn't preclude us from the obligation of finding all of the resources that we have to work together. And why am I speaking in this manner? Because fundamentally, what we confront in today's world, regionally and internationally, is a crisis of will. Do we have the will to make the distance, to solve the problems that we face? And I ask this question because to hear this morning that the primary topic for initial consideration is the pace of regional integration must have my colleague heads and the Secretary General feeling a certain way, to use a colloquialism. For we have known for too long what is required. And we have known instinctively and in practice what the IMF papers will share with us this morning, that greater pace of integration with the mobility of all of the factors, but in particular, people mobility is what is required in order to be able to create the conditions conducive to growth. I smile because I perhaps have sounded like a stuck record for the last 18 months with respect to the simple message that rather than being consumed with the jealousy that comes from national identity or national space, that we need to wake up and smell the coffee and to appreciate that what is required is greater numbers of persons coming to work every day within each of our countries in order to be able to expand production significantly. Let us be real. And I forgive myself because every time I think that I'm repeating over and over and there's no opportunity for progress, someone comes up and gets it and understands that the numbers just don't add up. And what numbers are those? Suriname. Bigger than the Netherlands. Can't make 600,000 people. The Netherlands is at 17 million. I see the United Kingdom High Commissioner here. Her country is the same size as Guyana. Guyana is struggling, even with the prospect of oil, to reach 800,000. And the United Kingdom has 66 million people. Belize, 380,000, the size of Israel. Israel has 8 million. And Barbados, of course, barely smaller than Singapore. We have 300,000, we hope, by the end of the next census next year. And Singapore 5 million and rising. I make this point because what is required is a will to ensure that we have a floor within the region such that the worst aspects of xenophobia can be tamed and we can get on with the business of managing migration in the best tradition of a country like Canada that has made sure that it has been able to transition in spite of the lack of population through a consistent program of managed migration. Those heads who stood before us agreeing to bring together as one a community of sovereign nations did so with the clear understanding that the constraints of size would forever act as an inhibitor to our capacity for growth. But the bottom line is that what has stood in the way is simply the will. In many instances, the public sensitization and education has been done. And we have therefore to ask ourselves, are we prepared for the considerations given by Dr. Ram of the Caribbean Development Bank as to what could be the fate of the region by 2050? Are we prepared to be considered potentially as the poorest region in the world? Now I say that conscious that the existential threat before us, and I don't speak of climate change anymore, I speak of the climate crisis, because that is what it is for us. Are we prepared to add to what I have just discussed the reality that the climate crisis is forcing us to choose between building resilience and moving on a development trajectory? Now, this raises other questions, and you must forgive me because at the core of it, I am still a lawyer, not a financier. And when you consider that our countries have not in any way added to the greenhouse gas emissions in any appreciable manner as compared to the damage and the development of the new possibility of climate refugees becoming part and parcel of our regional vocabulary on an ongoing basis, then you begin to appreciate that the conversation needs to change. And the conversation needs to change because with the best will in the world, we do not have the fiscal space nor the financial capacity to fundamentally tackle climate crisis in the way in which it needs tackling. And we ignore that there are not only the large, stunning impact of loss in the form of storms and hurricanes, which I call the heart attacks, but there is also the insidious version which comes in the form of sargassum weed and droughts, crisis in groundwater supply that the region continues to face. I know from where I stand the difficult decisions that we have to make as to where we allocate resources. And it is no different in St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, Turks and Caicos, Jamaica, Guyana, the Bahamas. It's no different. And we do so without any prospect of the Warsaw Mechanism for Loss and Damage so established to have the world's countries agree on progress without any delineation of what that potentially could mean to ease the burden of countries that are already suffering for the last 3 decades chronic underperformance with respect to economic growth. And as if that were not enough, having been lulled into the determination that you move from a monocrop economy into services 30, 40 years ago, having performed as the West Indies team did, having learned cricket decades ago, not necessarily today, we were then told that we need to change. And we need to change our tax policies because we are viewed by too many as tax havens. We maintain that we have not, and in our own case in Barbados, we're not a tax haven, and nor are we a low tax jurisdiction. Any country that taxes 28 cents cannot be viewed as a low tax jurisdiction. What we have done is to determine how we want to be able to tax. And it is our fundamental view that over the course of the next 2 to 3 decades, quite frankly, that the world will move more and more towards the taxation of assets and the taxation of transactions simply because of how the world is organized. In the same way that we saw the evolution of the joint stock company into the limited liability corporation over the course of centuries, because the mechanism for the conduct of business and the protection of legal liability changes to suit the environment within which it is functioning. Now, we have no difficulty with others reflecting views. But where we come from, we have a difficulty with name and shame. And you will forgive me if as a woman I have an even greater difficulty with it. Because that is a burden that we've had to carry since the beginning of mankind. You will equally forgive me for believing that if there is to be change of that structural nature and of that magnitude, that there ought to be a time frame for discussion and adjustment rather than simply using the power of size and might to effect change. This is part and parcel of the reality that we have faced. We cannot be on the same side, and then when it matters most, we ignore the realities of what this region faces. Since 1989, we have been calling through our association with the Commonwealth for a vulnerability index. We've said that it is impossible to be able to meet the needs of the region without appreciating that the simple measurement of a per capita income and GDP is inappropriate. How many more times must the region speak before the international institutions to which we belong and with which we share common purpose hear us and help us in the transition of this criteria for basic survival and access to concessional resources? And then we must face the other issue, that vulnerability is not something that we hold on to with pride. Vulnerability, regrettably, is our reality. And while the regional integration movement was intended to be able to minimize the impact, the negative impact of vulnerability, the climate crisis throws it back at us with a ferocity that is unparalleled in our history. Now, that may require of us a different conversation within the context of CARICOM, which is not for today. But what I do say is that the issue of will to be able to be faithful to the precepts agreed to internationally and to flesh them out, will to be able to reflect in our actions the moral leadership that is absolutely critical if we are to carry along not just the members of our population in the context of inclusive and sustainable growth, but our stakeholder partners as we move. And an appreciation that many of the things that the region faces now to deepen the integration movement are not immediately within our grasp, because we have to be spending money on other things, and the prospect of what lies ahead, particularly with the increasing numbers of underinsured and uninsured within our populations, makes it even more difficult. And to what do I refer? In order to deepen integration in this region, and in order to counter the worst aspects of xenophobia, we need to facilitate greater communication and greater movement. We need to be able to have a maritime bridge. The Canadians in the 1950s and 60s recognized that this region could not do it on its own and assisted us with two boats that have become legendary in our history, the Federal Maple and the Federal Palm. I say legendary in our history because I've never seen them. I don't know anything about them. And my generation, born for the most part at the time of independence, is unaware of these sea bridges. But our determination to be able to create them again is absolutely critical if we are going to see the sale of produce across the region become a daily reality, so that farmers in Caroni or in Castries or in Kingstown or in Roseau can get their produce to market, can supply the hotels in Barbados or St. Kitts or Antigua on a daily basis. The determination of the CARICOM Secretariat for us to be able to wrestle down a $5 billion import bill is what makes the difference to the household and family. But our failure to treat to the logistics of the movement of this produce is denying the opportunities to families within this region. Equally, our inability to reduce our costs of communication by artificially placing costs and prices on us for talking across the region, when invariably, if you pick up this phone and I go to do certain things, it comes up as Jamaica. Why? Because the switch from which it is operated is not located in Barbados. And if it is not located in Barbados, why am I paying roaming charges when I go to Jamaica, when I'm in Jamaica? The single domestic space in telecommunications is absolutely vital for the successful integration of our people, because at the end of the day, governments don't trade. It is people through companies and households that do so. And of course, ultimately, the ability to know about opportunities in each other's countries. I almost tire now of giving these speeches. And I tire of giving them because progress is too slow. And I ask myself, why is progress slow? And it comes right back down to where I started. Fundamentally, it is about the will to make that difference. I believe that this conference, and I'd like to thank the International Monetary Fund and the Caribbean Development Bank for bringing us together in another forum to begin to hopefully cause, not us in this room, because I'd like to believe that we all get it, but to cause people to recognize that the ability to change depends on our will to stay the course and to do the things that are necessary to make that definable difference. I'm inspired by our own journey in Barbados, and it has not by any means or stretch of the imagination been easy. 16 months ago, we stood in that room upstairs on the 1st of June, exactly 1 week after the election had been declared. And we announced that we were approaching the International Monetary Fund with a program and that we were suspending our our debt payments. With me were the representatives of the labor movement and the representatives of the private sector and other members of the government. Yesterday, we launched the international debt exchange, which will hopefully bring to an end within the next few weeks the debt restructuring saga of this country, taking us from the third most indebted country in the world at 176%, including the contingent liabilities that we found that were in the vicinity of about 19% of GDP, with 157% of publicly acknowledged debt. With this debt restructuring, our debt to GDP ratio will come down, we believe, to 114%. It is roughly at 118% after we successfully concluded the domestic debt exchange. What is required in this country now and throughout the region is sustained performance and restructuring and measures to boost growth at all levels. Barbados does not have enough people producing on a daily basis to be able to make the transformation that it needs to carry us to the next level. And that is why, on a sustained basis, I take the responsibility as lead Prime Minister for CARICOM Single Market and Single Economy as passionately as I take the responsibility for the domestic affairs of this country, for the two are inextricably linked and bound. That is why we have fought hard to bring to the table the private sector at the regional meetings, because it is now the private sector and the labor movement that will make the definable difference to production integration, such that we can have regional transformation and sustainable and inclusive growth. I ask those of us who are here to recognize that our battles are large already, and we have to have a sustained program of training to be able to bring our people fully into the third decade of the 21st century. It is not going to be overnight, as it never is with human beings. But let us not make our job that much more difficult by failing to recognize that there are certain things that are institutional barriers to us. The fact that the Bahamas cannot go and access concessional funding this morning after Dorian, as a middle-income country, ought to be of grave concern to those who have a sense of moral compass. The fact that we continue to have dictates imposed on us for the structural changes to our tax system with minimal notice and minimal time, in circumstances where we've seen the consequences in the middle of an IMF program to our corporation taxes. But we do it, and we remain steadfast in what we are doing, because we know that with time and with the legacy of resilience in our blood, we shall make it. And the fact, my friends, that in spite of all that mankind can say or do, there's a force out there that will do more to us, that within the context of 48 hours can change our lived reality completely, and requires of us within this community, therefore, to not only see and talk about regional transformation, but to begin to come to deal with questions of human security. Because if there are climate refugees, then we have an unstable neighborhood. And if we have an unstable neighborhood, then we have matters of human security to attend to. I trust and pray that our conversations today will cause all of us in the region, us internationally, to redouble our efforts and to recognize that that saying that time does not wait on any man is not just a saying, but has now become part of our reality. Martin Luther King said it best when he referred to the fierce urgency of now. I suspect that he would have said it even better if he lived in today's times. I pray God's blessings on our proceedings over the course of today, and I thank the IMF for not only coming, but also on behalf of the people of Barbados, I thank you for having the confidence to allow us to chart our own way. And I thank the people of Barbados for walking hand in hand, sharing the burden and recognizing that we didn't get there overnight. But if we stay the course, we shall make this journey ours, and we shall give thanks to those who helped us along the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. In an effort to try to pull back time, at this stage we're going to ask all the delegates who are sitting at the conference table to come forward so that the two photographers in front here can organize that family photograph.